Frank, you sit up there in that robe like you're God, but don't forget who signs the checks for the lights in this building. Those were the words that stopped the clocks in Providence Municipal Court that Tuesday morning. They didn't come from a drunk driver angry about a fine. They didn't come from a youth who didn't know better. They came from the man who was supposed to be the face of our city. I was sitting in my chair, adjusting my glasses, looking down at the docket. I am Judge Frank Caprio. I have spent decades on this bench. I have had people scream at me. I have had people beg me, and I have had people lie to my face. But I have never had a sitting official try to foreclose on the dignity of the court before the session even began. The man was Mayor Richard Sterling. He was 52 years old, dressed in a custom Italian suit that shimmered under the fluorescent lights, with a silk tie that probably cost more than the bailiff's weekly salary. He didn't walk into the courtroom. He strode in like he was cutting a ribbon at a ceremony. He was followed by two aides who were furiously typing on phones and a lawyer who looked like he was already sweating. The air in the room changed instantly. It got heavy. The gallery, usually full of people whispering or shuffling papers, went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. You could hear the squeak of the mayor's polished leather shoes on the floor. And I knew right in that second that the script of justice was about to be challenged. If you believe that no title is above the truth, you need to see how this started. My bailiff, a man who has seen everything, stiffened his posture. My clerk stopped typing. Mayor Sterling stopped at the defense table, but he didn't look at me. He looked at his watch, tapped it, and then sighed loudly, as if my courtroom was a waiting room he was too important to be in. But he wasn't the only person involved in this case. On the other side of the aisle sat a man named Elias Thorne. Elias was 68 years old. He wore a sweater that had seen better days and trousers that were clean but frayed at the hem. He held a small, crumpled hat in hands that were stained with flour and yeast. Elias was a baker. He had run a small shop on the east side for 40 years. He looked small in that chair, shrinking away from the mayor like a dry leaf next to a fire. Case by case, I treat everyone the same. A mayor or a baker, in this room, you are just a citizen. But that morning, the hierarchy of the outside world was trying to force its way in. The case file in front of me seemed simple on paper. City code violation, business permit revocation. But looking at Elias's shaking hands and the mayor's arrogant smirk, I knew this wasn't about a permit. This was about power. The bailiff's voice broke the tension. Case number 44 to 92, the City of Providence versus Elias Thorne, with complaining witness Mayor Richard Sterling. I looked up over my glasses. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice low and even. Please identify yourselves for the record. Elias stood up slowly, his knees popping in the quiet room. Elias Thorne, Your Honor, he whispered. He sounded terrified. Then the mayor didn't stand. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and waved a hand vaguely in my direction. You know who I am, Frank. Let's speed this up. I have a lunch at the Capitol in an hour. The disrespect hit me like a physical wave. In my courtroom, you stand. Not for me, Frank Caprio, but for what this bench represents. I waited. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch out. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The mayor frowned, realizing I wasn't moving. He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer whispered frantically, "Stand up, sir." Mayor Sterling rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture meant for the people in the back row, and slowly, lazily pushed himself to his feet. Mayor Richard Sterling, he said, his tone dripping with boredom. Here to watch you do your job and shut this place down. He pointed a manicured finger at Elias. That man is a nuisance, and I'm tired of waiting for the bureaucracy to handle it, so I'm handling it. I looked at Elias, then at the mayor. Mr. Mayor, I said calmly, in this room, you are a witness and a complainant. You are not the judge, and you certainly do not give orders to this bench. Sterling chuckled. a cold, dry sound. "We'll see about that," he muttered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "We'll see who gives orders when budget season comes around." The threat hung in the air. He was threatening the court's funding right in the middle of a session. I saw the people in the gallery exchange wide-eyed looks. This was the setup. The mayor thought he was walking into a rubber stamp meeting. He had no idea he was walking into a reckoning. I didn't blink. When a man threatens your livelihood in open court, he expects fear. He expects you to retreat. But Richard Sterling forgot one thing. I don't work for him. I work for the law. "Your threat is noted for the record," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife through soft butter. "Now let's hear the actual complaint. Why are we trying to shut down a bakery that has served this city since before you were born?" The mayor didn't let his lawyer speak. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with an aggressive snap. "It's a health hazard, Frank. It's a blight. We're trying to modernize the East Side, bring in high-end retail, coffee shops, progress, and right in the middle of it is this relic." He waved a hand at Elias like he was wafting away a bad smell. "Thorne's Daily Bread. It attracts vermin. It smells. The facade is falling apart. We have cited him 5 times in the last week." I looked at the file. 5 times in a week?" I asked. "Mr. Thorne, how many citations did you have in the previous 40 years? Elias stood up, his hands trembling on the table. He looked at me with eyes that were watery and red-rimmed. "0, Your Honor. Never one. Not for a rat. Not for a crumb. I scrubbed those floors on my hands and knees every night at 3 a.m. My wife, she used to help me before she passed. We treat that dough like it's holy." "He's lying," Sterling barked. "My inspectors found violations. Look at the photos." He slid a packet of glossy photos across the bench. I picked them up. I adjusted my glasses. I looked closely. Photo A, a single trash can lid slightly askew in an alley. Photo B, a small crack in the sidewalk pavement outside the door. Photo C, a close-up of a window with a smudge of flour on it. I looked up. "Mr. Mayor," I said, holding up Photo A, "this is your evidence of a health hazard? A crooked lid?" "It indicates negligence," Sterling shouted. His face was starting to turn a shade of red that clashed with his expensive tie. "It shows he doesn't care. And we have reports. Anonymous complaints from neighbors saying they saw rats." "Anonymous complaints," I repeated slowly. "And these inspectors, did they find the rats?" The city lawyer, a young man named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth, stood up. "Your Honor, the report says, potential for rodent activity. No actual rodents were observed." The gallery murmured, a low sound of disbelief. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "Potential is enough. We are revitalizing this city. We can't have a rundown, flour-dusted shack lowering property values for the new condos going up next door." And there it was, the word that slipped out. Condos. I leaned back in my chair. The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't about hygiene. This wasn't about rats. This was about real estate. And Elias Thorne was just a pebble in the shoe of a giant construction project. "Mr. Thorne," I asked gently, "who owns the land next to your bakery?" Elias swallowed hard. "A developer company, Your Honor. Sterling Heights, LLC." The courtroom went dead silent again. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. Sterling Heights. The mayor's last name was Sterling. I looked at the mayor. He didn't look ashamed. He looked defiant. He crossed his arms and stared me down, daring me to make the connection out loud. So I did. My voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerous. "You are telling me that your inspectors, who report to you, found potential violations in a shop that sits right next to a project that shares your name." "It's a family trust," Sterling snapped. "I have no direct control. Don't you dare imply conflict of interest, Frank. I am cleaning up the city." "Cleaning up?" I mused. "Or clearing out?" Elias looked between us, terrified. "They offered to buy me out, Your Honor," he whispered. For pennies. I said no. It's my life. It's all I have left of my wife. And the next day the inspectors came. The mayor laughed. A cruel, dismissive sound. He's senile. He's imagining conspiracies. The law is the law, Judge. He is in violation of City Code 812. Revoke the permit. Bang the gavel. Let's go to lunch. I looked at the clock. I looked at the photos of the crooked lid. And then I looked at the mayor. He thought he had won. He thought power was a bulldozer that could just push the little people into the dirt. Mr. Mayor, I said, you seem in a rush, but in this courtroom, we take our time. And I have a few more questions about these anonymous complaints. The mayor checked his watch again, annoyed. Ask whatever you want. The facts don't change. Oh, facts change, I said softly, especially when you shine a light on them. Light? Sterling scoffed, checking his cufflinks. You can shine all the light you want, Frank. It won't change the smell of yeast in old bricks. It won't change the fact that the community wants him out. The community, I repeated. Let's talk about them. Mr. Henderson, please hand me the log of these anonymous complaints. The young lawyer Henderson hesitated. He looked at the mayor, then at me. His hand shook slightly as he passed a single sheet of paper over the bench. I adjusted my glasses again. I looked at the timestamps. I looked at the details. 3 complaints, I read aloud, received last Monday. The first one came in at 9 a.m., the second at 9:02 a.m., and the third at 9:05 a.m. I looked up. Mr. Mayor, that is a very passionate neighborhood. 3 different people saw rats within 5 minutes of each other. People talk, Sterling snapped. Word gets around. Maybe a customer saw something and told a friend. Maybe, I said. But Mr. Thorne, who are your neighbors? Elias stood up slowly, clutching his hat. Well, Your Honor, on the left side is the empty lot where the construction is supposed to start. On the right side is the old warehouse that's been boarded up for 2 years. And across the street, that's the river. The gallery murmured. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. So, I said, turning back to the mayor, we have complaints from an empty lot, a boarded-up warehouse, and a river. Unless the fish have cell phones, Mr. Mayor, your community seems to be ghosts. Sterling's face went from red to a dangerous shade of purple. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor, echoing like a gunshot. This is ridiculous. You are mocking the procedure. The complaints are filed. The inspectors verified them. You are questioning the integrity of the entire Department of Health based on timestamps. I am questioning everything, I said, my voice hardening, because when I look at this call log, Mr. Henderson, I see something else. I pointed a finger at the paper. Mr. Henderson, does the city complaint line record the incoming number prefix? Henderson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Yes, Your Honor, for callback purposes. Read the prefix for the first call, I ordered. It's, Henderson stammered. Read it, Sterling shouted. Get this over with. It's 5550100, Henderson whispered. The room went silent, dead silent. Everyone in Providence knew that prefix. And the second call? I asked, leaning forward. And the third? I pressed. Henderson, defeated, whispered again. 5550100 and 5550100. I took off my glasses and set them on the bench. I looked straight at Mayor Richard Sterling. Mr. Mayor, 5550100 is the main switchboard for City Hall. These anonymous neighbors didn't call from the street. They called from inside your own building. The gasps from the gallery were audible this time. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Sterling didn't back down. He didn't apologize. He doubled down. He leaned over the table, his knuckles white, his eyes bulging. So what? My staff made the calls. They saw the violations. They are citizens too. You think you're clever? Catching a technicality? I am the mayor. I represent the city. If I say it's a hazard, it's a hazard. That is not how the law works, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You cannot manufacture a crisis to seize a man's property. That is not governing. That is theft. Theft! Sterling screamed, his voice cracked. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You watch your mouth, old man. You are sitting in a chair that I fund. You are speaking to a man who can have this courthouse turned into a parking lot by next week. You think you can embarrass me? I will bury you. The bailiff took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. The mayor was losing control. He was no longer the polished politician in the Italian suit. He was a bully who had been caught, and he was ready to burn the house down rather than admit he started the fire. Mr. Bailiff, stand down, I said calmly, though my heart was beating fast. Let him speak. Let everyone hear exactly who is running their city. You want to see power? Sterling hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I'll show you power. I'm going to make a call right now, and when I hang up, you won't have a job, and this baker will be on the street. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. In a courtroom where phones are strictly forbidden, the mayor of Providence prepared to make a call that he thought would end my career. But he didn't know who was about to walk through the back doors. Get the governor on the line, Sterling screamed into his phone, his thumb hammering the screen. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Tell him Judge Caprio has gone rogue. Tell him I want the municipal court dissolved. The gallery was frozen. This was no longer a hearing. It was a meltdown. A man who controlled the city's budget was trying to dismantle the judicial branch in real time because he couldn't get his way. Bailiff, I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of the entire legal system. Secure that phone. My bailiff, a man built like a linebacker, stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He reached out and plucked the expensive smartphone from the mayor's hand like he was taking a toy from a toddler. Hey, Sterling shouted, lunging forward. That is city property, that is… Bang! The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They swung wide with force. The sound cut Sterling off mid-sentence. He spun around, his face flushed with rage, expecting perhaps his security detail or the press. But it wasn't the press. Standing there was a woman. She was small, wearing a gray raincoat that was wet from the drizzle outside. She clutched a cardboard box to her chest like a shield. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room until they locked onto me. Who enters this court? I asked, standing up. The woman took a step forward. Her voice shook, but it was clear. My name is Elena Vance, Your Honor. Sterling's face didn't just go pale. It went gray. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He took a step back, bumping into his lawyer. She doesn't belong here, he stammered. She's fired. She was fired yesterday for incompetence. Remove her. Let her speak, I ordered. Miss Vance, step to the well. What is your business here? Elena walked past the mayor. She didn't look at him, but I saw her knuckles turn white on the box she was holding. She stopped next to Elias Thorne, the baker. She looked at the old man, and tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne, she whispered. Then she looked at me. Your Honor, I was the chief health inspector for the East Side District until 4 p.m. yesterday. I am the one who supposedly wrote those 5 citations. The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. I banged the gavel. Bang, bang, order, order in this court. I looked at the young lawyer, Henderson. He had his head in his hands. He knew. He had known the whole time. Miss Vance, I said, my voice gentle now. You say you were the inspector? Did you inspect Thorne's daily bread last week? Yes, Your Honor, she said. She opened her box and pulled out a logbook. It was old, bound in leather, with pages that couldn't be edited or deleted. I inspected it on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And did you find rats? I asked. Did you find filth? Did you find a health hazard? Elena shook her head vigorously. No, Your Honor. Mr. Thorne's kitchen is spotless. It smells like lemon and yeast. I gave him a grade A rating. I wrote it right here. She held up the logbook. Then explain this, I said, holding up the citation the mayor had presented. This document says you found vermin. It has your signature at the bottom. Elena looked at the paper from a distance and closed her eyes. That is not my signature, she said, her voice trembling with anger. That is a stamp. A rubber stamp kept in the mayor's office for administrative emergencies. When I refused to write the ticket, the mayor called me into his office. He told me that if I didn't find a violation, he would find a new inspector. She took a deep breath. I told him I wouldn't lie to destroy a man's life, so he fired me. And then he used the stamp. I looked at Richard Sterling. He was backed against the defense table, trapped. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the cornered look of a predator who has suddenly become the prey. She is a disgruntled employee, Sterling shouted, but his voice lacked its earlier fire. She is lying to get back at me. It's a political hit job. You orchestrated this, didn't you, Frank? I sat down slowly. I placed my hands flat on the bench. I looked at the evidence the mayor had brought, the photos, the complaints from City Hall, the forged citations. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a crime scene. Mr. Mayor, I said, my voice deadly quiet, you accuse this court of being a circus, but you are the ringleader. You forged official documents, you intimidated a witness, and you fired a public servant for refusing to break the law. You can't prove that, Sterling hissed. It's her word against mine, and I am the mayor. Oh, I don't need to prove it, I said, because Miss Vance didn't come alone. I nodded to the back of the room. Miss Vance, is there anything else in that box? She nodded. She reached in and pulled out a small black device, a digital voice recorder. In the health department, she said, we record all disciplinary meetings for HR purposes. It's city policy, Your Honor. Sterling's eyes went wide. He lunged for the box. Give me that, he screamed. Bailiff, I shouted. My bailiff stepped in between them, his chest like a wall. Sterling bounced off him, stumbling back. Play it, I ordered. Elena pressed the button. The static hissed for a second, and then, clear as day, the voice of Mayor Richard Sterling filled the silent courtroom. I don't care about the truth, Elena. I have investors breathing down my neck. That land is worth $10 million as condos, and it's worth zero as a bakery. You write the ticket, or you clean out your desk. Do you understand me? I will crush him, and I will crush you. Click. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a career ending. It was the sound of a city waking up. I looked at the mayor. He was shaking. He looked at the door, measuring the distance to run. Now, I said, leaning forward, Mr. Mayor, I have one question for you. The recording ended, but the echo of his own voice, cruel, greedy, and undeniable, seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Mayor Sterling stared at the small black device on the bench. For a moment, he looked like he had been punched in the gut. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. The arrogance that had filled the room 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the sheer, naked panic of a man watching his life crumble. That is illegal, he finally shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. She recorded me without consent. That is inadmissible. You cannot use that. It's a violation of my privacy. Privacy? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Mr. Mayor, you were in your office conducting city business, giving orders to a public employee about a public health matter. There is no expectation of privacy when you are conspiring to commit fraud on the taxpayer's dime. It's a deep fake, Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. He looked at the gallery, desperate for an ally. Technology these days, she fabricated it. She's trying to frame me because I fired her for incompetence. He was spiraling. He was screaming now, just like the title of this story says. He was yelling over me, yelling over the evidence, trying to drown out the truth with noise. Sit down, I ordered. Bailiff, if he speaks out of turn one more time, you will restrain him. Sterling froze. The bailiff was standing right next to him now, hand hovering over the cuffs. The mayor sank slowly into his chair, breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the courtroom. The people in the gallery were standing. Some had their phones out recording. They knew. The city knew. I picked up the evidence Sterling had brought, the photos of the crooked trash can, the forged citation. I held them up next to Elena's logbook and the recorder. "Mr. Mayor," I said, leaning forward until I was staring right into his eyes, "you came into my court today thinking you were the law. You thought you could bully a baker, fire an inspector, and threaten a judge. You thought your title was a shield." I paused. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the windows outside. "But you forgot one thing," I continued. "In this room, the only title that matters is citizen. And right now, Citizen Sterling, you are in a lot of trouble." Sterling wiped his face with a silk handkerchief. You can't do anything to me," he whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. "I am an elected official. You are just a municipal judge. You handle traffic tickets. You can't touch me." "Is that so?" I asked. I looked at Elias Thorne, the baker who just wanted to make bread. I looked at Elena Vance, the inspector who lost her job for having integrity. And then I looked back at the mayor. "Mr. Mayor," I said, "I have listened to your threats. I have seen your forgeries. I have heard your confession on tape. But before I make my ruling, I have just one question for you." Sterling looked up. He looked defiant, but his eyes were terrified. "What?" he snapped. "What is your question?" I took off my glasses. I folded my hands. "Mr. Mayor," I asked softly, "if this bakery had belonged to your own father, would you have stamped that paper?" The question hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't a legal question. It was a moral trap. If he said yes, he was a monster who would sell out his own family. If he said no, he admitted that he knew exactly what he was doing, targeting Elias because he was weak, because he was poor, because he was in the way. Sterling opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to lie. I could see the gears turning. He wanted to say, "The law is the law." But he looked at Elias, an old man with flour on his hands, just like his own grandfather might have been. He looked at the gallery, hundreds of eyes judging him. He couldn't answer. He stammered, That's not relevant." "It is the only thing that is relevant," I boomed, my voice filling the room. "Because it proves that you didn't act as a mayor. You acted as a predator. You didn't enforce the code. You weaponized it. You looked at this man and you didn't see a citizen. You saw a paycheck." Sterling slumped. The fight went out of him. He knew in that silence that his career was over. He hadn't just lost a case. He had lost the city. I turned to my clerk. "Enter a judgment of dismissal for all charges against Elias Thorne. The citations are void. The permit remains valid." Then I turned to the bailiff. "And bailiff," I said, my voice cold, "please lock the doors. Because while this traffic matter is dismissed, we now have a new matter to discuss. It's called perjury. It's called forgery. And Mr. Sterling isn't going anywhere." Sterling stood up panicking. "You can't arrest me. I have immunity." "Not in my courtroom," I said, "and not for crimes committed in front of my face." I raised the gavel. "Act 6, I whispered to myself. The fall. The sound of the heavy oak doors locking at the back of the courtroom echoed like a thunderclap. Clack, thud. It was a sound that usually signaled the end of the day, the closing of business. But for Mayor Richard Sterling, it signaled the closing of a trap he had built for himself. He spun around, his eyes wide, looking at the bailiff standing guard. He looked at the windows, high and barred. He looked at his lawyer, Henderson. "Do something!" Sterling screamed at the young attorney. "He's holding me hostage. Object! Call the police! Call the governor!" Henderson stood up slowly. He looked at the forged documents on my bench, the fake health citation with the rubber stamp. He looked at the digital recorder that had just played the mayor's confession. And then he did something that made the gallery gasp. He started packing his briefcase. Mr. Mayor, Henderson said, his voice shaking but clear, I represent the city of Providence in civil matters. I do not represent Richard Sterling in criminal felonies committed in open court. You are on your own. Sterling's jaw dropped. You work for me. I work for the taxpayers, Henderson said, snapping his case shut, and I advise you to remain silent. The mayor stood alone. The most powerful man in the city was suddenly just a man in a suit that was sweating through the armpits. He turned back to me, his face twisting into a sneer of desperation. You can't do this, Frank, he hissed. You can't arrest a sitting mayor for shouting. It's spirited debate. It's politics. If you touch me, I will sue this court into the ground. I have immunity. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands. Immunity protects you when you are performing official duties, Mr. Sterling. I snorted. It does not protect you when you commit perjury. It does not protect you when you present forged evidence to a judicial officer. And it certainly does not protect you when you attempt to intimidate a witness in my presence. I picked up the anonymous complaint log. You stood there, I said, pointing a finger at the spot where he stood, and you told me under oath that these were calls from concerned neighbors. You lied. That is perjury. Count 1. I picked up the citation. You presented this document as the work of Miss Vance. We now know it was a forgery created by your office. That is tampering with evidence. Count 2. I pointed to the recorder. And we all heard you threaten to crush a city employee if she didn't break the law for you. That is extortion. Count 3. Sterling was backing away, step by step, until his back hit the wooden railing that separated the court from the gallery. This is a setup, he muttered, looking at the people recording him with their phones. You're all in on it. You staged this. Bailiff, I said calmly, take Mr. Sterling into custody for contempt of court. We will hold him until the state police arrive to process the felony charges. My bailiff, a man named Officer Miller, who had served this city for 30 years, stepped forward. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal jingled, a sound usually reserved for drunk drivers and petty thieves, not for the man whose name was on the city welcome signs. Turn around, Mr. Mayor, Miller said. He didn't shout. He didn't shove. He just gave an order. Don't you touch me. Sterling swiped at Miller's hand. That was the mistake. In a split second, Miller spun the mayor around. He pressed him against the railing. Click, click, the handcuffs went on. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a roar of shock. People stood up on the benches to see. Flashbulbs went off. A mayor in handcuffs in the middle of a Tuesday morning session. Sterling's face was pressed against the wood. Do you know what you've done? He screamed, his voice muffled. I am the city. You just arrested the city. No, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I arrested a criminal. The city is safe. In fact, looking at Mr. Thorne over there, I pointed to Elias, who was weeping silently, holding Elena's hand. I think the city just got a little bit cleaner. I looked at the gallery. Order, I commanded. Sit down. This is still a court of law. The room quieted down, but the energy was electric. Sterling was hauled up, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie crooked. He looked at me with pure hatred. You're finished, Caprio, he spat. My friends in the Senate, they will destroy you. You won't be judging a dog show by next week. I looked at him with pity. Truly, I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt sad that a man could have so much and yet be so empty that he had to steal from a baker to feel big. Mr. Sterling, I said softly, you worry about your Senate friends. I will worry about the law. And right now the law says you are going to a holding cell. Officer Miller, remove him. As they dragged him out, kicking, shouting about conspiracies and lawsuits, I saw something I will never forget. Elias Thorne, the baker, stood up. He took off his crumpled hat, and as the disgraced mayor passed him, Elias didn't jeer. He didn't laugh. He just bowed his head. It was a moment of dignity that Richard Sterling would never understand. The side door closed. The shouting faded into the hallway. The room was suddenly very quiet. I looked at the docket. I looked at the next case file. It was a parking ticket for a nurse who had parked in a loading zone. Real life. But before I could call the next case, Elena Vance stepped forward. She was still trembling. She looked at the empty spot where the mayor had stood, and then she looked at me. "Your Honor," she whispered, "thank you. But I don't have a job anymore. And he has powerful friends. What happens now?" I smiled at her. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "Elena," I said, "you did the hardest thing a person can do. You told the truth when it cost you everything. And in this city, despite what Mr. Sterling thinks, truth still has a value." I turned to the gallery. "Is there anyone here from the city council?" I asked. A woman in the back row stood up. I recognized her, Councilwoman Rodriguez. She had been taking notes the entire time. "I'm here, Judge," she said. "Councilwoman," I said, "you just saw your chief health inspector wrongfully terminated for refusing to commit a crime. I trust the council will rectify this." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Consider her reinstated as of right now, Judge, with back pay and a raise." The courtroom broke into applause. Real applause. Not for me, for Elena, for Elias, for the system working just once, the way it was supposed to. But the story wasn't over. Because power doesn't give up that easily, and Richard Sterling had one card left to play. The applause had faded. Elena and Elias had left, walking out into the rain with their heads held high. The courtroom was empty, save for my clerk Sarah and Officer Miller, who was guarding the holding cell door. I sat on the bench, rubbing my temples. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the heavy reality of what we had just done. We had arrested the mayor. In a city like Providence, that is not a legal maneuver. It is an earthquake. "Judge," Sarah whispered, looking at her computer screen. "The phone lines are lighting up. The governor's office, the attorney general, CNN. "Let them ring," I said, closing the case file. We followed the procedure. "The state police will be here in 20 minutes to take custody." Bam! The doors flew open again. They didn't swing, they were shoved. A man walked in. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a lawyer I recognized. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it was made of alligator skin. He didn't look at the empty seats. He walked straight to the well, his heels clicking sharply on the floor like a ticking clock. He didn't bow. He didn't introduce himself. He just slapped a piece of paper on my bench. "Release order," he said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. "Signed by Superior Court Judge Vance. No relation to your witness, I assure you. 5 minutes ago. Immediate release of Mayor Richard Sterling on personal recognizance." I looked at the man. "And who are you?" "I am Marcus Cole," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "Special counsel to the mayor. And you, Frank, are out of your depth." He pointed to the holding cell. "You have staged a very cute piece of theater here, but the show is over. Judge Vance has asserted jurisdiction. The charges you trumped up, perjury, extortion, those are felonies. They belong in Superior Court, not in a traffic court basement. Your holding order is null and void." He smiled. It was a shark smile. "Bring him out, officer. We have a car waiting." Officer Miller looked at me. He was a good cop, but he knew who Marcus Cole was. Cole was the fixer, the man who made DUIs disappear for senators' sons, the man Sterling called when he needed to bury a body, legally speaking. "Judge?" Miller asked, his hand on the key. I looked at the paper. It was real. A writ of habeas corpus, signed and stamped. It ordered the immediate transfer of custody. If I disobeyed it, I would be in contempt. Cole had played the card perfectly. He was going to take Sterling out the back door, put him in a limo, and by tonight the mayor would be at a press conference calling me a lunatic. The evidence would disappear. The recording would be lost. Cole tapped his watch. Tick-tock. Frank, I'd hate to add unlawful imprisonment to your list of mistakes today. I looked at the signature on the order. Judge Vance, a man known for his golf trips with the mayor. I looked at Cole, and then I looked at the statute book sitting on the corner of my desk. You are right, Mr. Cole, I said slowly. This is a valid order for the felonies. Perjury, extortion, tampering. Those are state charges. I have no jurisdiction to hold him on those. Cole's smile widened. Glad to see you still have some sense. Officer, unlock the door. However, I said, raising a finger. Cole stopped. However what? However, I continued, opening the statute book to a page I had bookmarked in my mind 30 years ago. This order demands the release of the prisoner regarding the criminal charges listed in the warrant. Semantics, Cole waved his hand. Let him go. It is not semantics, I said, my voice hardening. It is the law. You see, Mr. Cole, I did not just arrest Mr. Sterling for felonies. I arrested him for something else. Something that happens entirely within the four walls of this room. Something that Superior Court cannot override because it is an offense against this bench specifically. I turned to Sarah. Clerk, read the docket entry for 10:45 a.m. Sarah stood up, her voice shaky but loud. Defendant Richard Sterling found in direct criminal contempt of court for disrupting proceedings, threatening a judicial officer, and attempting to intimidate a witness in the presence of the judge. I looked back at Cole. His smile flickered. Contempt, I said softly. Direct contempt. In Rhode Island, a municipal judge has the absolute authority to punish contempt committed in his presence to maintain order. That is not a state felony. That is a summary judgment. My judgment. I picked up my pen. I sentenced him to 7 days. Not for the forgery, not for the perjury, but for the disrespect. And Mr. Cole, no Superior Court judge can vacate a contempt finding from another court without a full appeal process. I leaned over the bench. And that appeal takes about, 7 days. Cole's face went white. He knew the law. He knew I had him. He had brought a bucket to put out a fire, but I had built a moat. You can't do this, Cole hissed. He is the mayor. You are going to put the mayor in a cell for a week because he raised his voice. No, I said. I am putting him in a cell because he thought his voice was louder than the law. I handed the release order back to him. This order is valid for the felonies. So in 7 days, when he finishes his sentence for contempt, you are welcome to pick him up and take him to Superior Court to face those charges. But until next Tuesday, he belongs to me. I turned to Officer Miller. Officer, the prisoner is remanded to the adult correctional institutions for 7 days. Do not release him to Mr. Cole. Do not release him to the governor. Release him only to the calendar. Miller grinned. Yes, Your Honor. Cole slammed his briefcase on the table. This is war, Caprio. You are finished. I will have your robe. You can have the robe, I said, standing up and gathering my files. It's just polyester. But you can't have my integrity. I looked at the camera at the back of the room, the courtroom camera that records everything for the public record. The red light was still blinking. And Mr. Cole, I added, pointing to the camera, you might want to smile. You're on camera in Providence. Cole spun around, realizing the entire exchange had been recorded. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, cursing. I sat back down. The silence returned, but this time it was a peaceful silence. Sarah, I said, what's next on the docket? Sarah smiled, wiping a tear from her eye. A parking ticket, Judge. A nurse. She says she was delivering medicine to a sick patient. Call her in, I said. Let's get back to the real work. But as I waited for the nurse to walk in, I knew the story wasn't quite done. There was one final scene left. The scene where the lesson is learned. Because 7 days later, Richard Sterling would have to come back, and I would be waiting. 7 days later, the rain had stopped. The sun was shining on Providence, but inside the courtroom, the air was solemn. The gallery was packed, not with reporters this time, but with citizens, neighbors, shop owners, people who wanted to see if the system really worked. In the front row sat Elias Thorne, wearing his best Sunday suit, and Elena Vance, holding her reinstatement letter. "Call the matter," I said. "State of Rhode Island versus Richard Sterling," the clerk announced. "Review of contempt sentence." The side door opened. There was no strutting this time, no expensive Italian shoes clicking on the floor. Richard Sterling walked in wearing a gray jumpsuit issued by the ACI. His wrists were handcuffed in front of him. He hadn't shaved in a week. The arrogance that had filled the room like a noxious gas was gone, replaced by something hollow and exhausted. He stood at the table. His high-priced lawyer, Marcus Cole, was nowhere to be found. Sterling was alone. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I said. He looked up, blinking against the lights. "Good morning, Your Honor," he rasped. His voice was quiet, broken. "You have spent 7 days in the custody of the state," I said. 7 days without a phone, without a title, without a staff to tell you how important you are. Did you have time to think? Sterling nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. "I did. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the noise. It's very quiet in there, Judge. You can't shout your way out of a cell." "No," I said, "you can't. In there you are just a man with a number. And out here, Mr. Thorne is just a man with a bakery. Do you see the difference now?" Sterling turned slowly. He looked at Elias for the first time. He didn't look through him. He looked at him. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice trembling, I wanted to build a legacy. I wanted a tower with my name on it, but I tried to build it on top of your life. I looked at your shop and I saw dirt. I didn't see the work. I didn't see the 40 years. He took a breath. "My father, he was a bricklayer. He worked with his hands until they bled. You asked me last week if I would have stamped that paper if it was his shop." Sterling wiped his eyes with his shoulder. "The answer is no," he whispered. "I wouldn't have. And that means I forgot who I was. I'm sorry." Elias stood up. He didn't smile. He didn't offer forgiveness easily. He just nodded once, acknowledging the humanity if not the man. "And Miss Vance," Sterling said, turning to Elena, "you were the only one in my office with a spine. I punished you for having integrity. I am ashamed." The room was silent. It was the silence of a lesson learned too late. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I accept your apology on behalf of this court. You have served your 7 days for contempt. You have purged the disrespect you showed this bench." I picked up the gavel. "However," I continued, my voice firm, "remorse does not erase action. An apology repairs the soul, but it does not fix the law you broke." I nodded to the back of the room. 2 Rhode Island state troopers stepped forward, their hats in their hands, waiting respectfully. "The felonies, perjury, extortion, forgery, remain," I said. "They are not my jurisdiction. They belong to the Superior Court, and they belong to the people of Rhode Island." Sterling looked at the troopers. He didn't fight. He didn't scream about immunity. He just nodded. He knew. "Officer Miller," I said, "transfer custody." Miller unlocked the cuffs from the bench rail and handed Sterling over to the troopers. The transition was smooth. The mayor, the former mayor really, was led away. As he reached the door, he looked back at me one last time. "Judge," he asked. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." "Thank you," he said softly, "for stopping me." Then he was gone. The doors closed. The heavy thud signaled the end of the drama. The gallery let out a breath they had been holding for a week. Elias shook Elena's hand. They walked out together. Back to a bakery that was open for business. Back to a job that was safe. I sat alone on the bench for a moment. I looked at the empty chair where the most powerful man in the city had sat, and then I looked at the seal of Providence on the wall. It says a greeting of welcome. My clerk, Sarah, handed me the next file. "You okay, Judge?" she asked. I put my glasses back on. I looked at the file. City versus Maria Gonzalez. Parking in a handicap zone. "I am fine, Sarah," I said. "The system worked. It bent, but it didn't break." I looked at the camera one last time. "To everyone watching," I said, "remember this. It doesn't matter if you have $1 million or $10 in your pocket. It doesn't matter if you are a mayor or a baker. When you walk through those doors, you are equal. And if you try to use your power to hurt the little guy, well, you might just find out that the little guy has a voice too." I tapped the gavel. A gentle sound.